Grace had spent the whole morning convincing herself she belonged there. The sunlight spilled through the half-open blinds, casting soft lines across the beige carpet of her modest Savannah home. She stood in front of the mirror, back straight, hands trembling slightly as she tugged the zipper on a navy dress she had found 2 weeks ago at a clearance rack tucked behind prom gowns and winter coats. It was a size too tight. The fabric stretched a little across her ribs, but it zipped, and that was good enough. She turned sideways, then the other way, smoothing her hands over her hips like she was ironing out her own nerves. In the hallway, tiny footsteps padded closer. Ethan appeared, all dressed up in a white button-down shirt with a clip-on bow tie askew under his chin. His hair, despite the gel and Grace's careful brushing, had already begun to curl rebelliously at the sides. "You look like a movie star," he said, eyes wide and honest. Grace smiled, something real tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You're my favorite hype man," she whispered, reaching out to fix his collar. He adjusted his tie with exaggerated care. "Do you think Uncle Matthew is nervous?" "Probably," she replied, grabbing her purse. "Weddings are scary." She didn't say what she was really thinking. Family is scarier. The drive across town was quiet except for Ethan's humming and the occasional check in the rearview mirror. Grace rehearsed pleasantries in her head. "You look beautiful, Chloe." "Congratulations, Matthew." "Yes, Ethan's getting so big." She practiced them like lines in a school play, hoping that if she got the tone just right, no one would notice she didn't quite fit the role. The venue was nestled beneath moss-draped oaks in a white colonial building known for its southern elegance. Rows of white chairs flanked a cobblestone path. Inside, chandeliers flickered above tables draped in ivory linen, each centerpiece a symmetrical burst of hydrangeas. Champagne sparkled in tall flutes, and soft string music played from a tucked-away quartet. Everything smelled like roses and expensive perfume. Grace held Ethan's hand a little tighter as they entered. Her heels, bought years ago for a job interview that didn't work out, clicked too loudly on the polished floor. The dress tugged slightly with each step. She adjusted the hem and tried to ignore the whisper of static in her hair. "Mom," Ethan said, looking around, "everyone looks so fancy." "They do," she replied, smoothing his shirt. "And so do you." From across the room, Barbara spotted them. Her eyes scanned Grace from head to toe, pausing slightly at the clearance dress, the heels, the simple silver studs in her ears. Then came the smile, tight, practiced, familiar. "You made it," Barbara said, leaning in for a one-cheek air kiss. "You look, well." It wasn't a compliment, but Grace smiled anyway. "Hi, Grandma," Ethan chirped, stepping forward. Barbara's face softened, if only a fraction. "Hello, sweet boy, don't you look sharp?" The exchange lasted no more than 30 seconds, but it left Grace breathless. She guided Ethan to their assigned table, tucking themselves quietly at the edge of the room. Most seats were already taken. Laughter rose and fell like waves from the head table. Chloe's voice was unmistakable, lilting, polished, deliberate. Grace forced herself to look. The bride glowed in a fitted pearl-white gown, her hair swept into a low chignon. She held a flute of champagne with ease, laughing at something one of the bridesmaids whispered. Matthew sat beside her, beaming but distant. He hadn't seen Grace yet. Grace sat straight, shoulders back, hands folded in her lap. She reminded herself to breathe slowly, to sip water, to look pleasant. Ethan, always observant, leaned close. "You okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Someone clinked a glass at a nearby table. The quartet shifted to a soft rendition of "Can't Help Falling in Love." Grace smiled politely at a woman who passed by, nodding like they shared some secret. They didn't. From the head table, Chloe glanced her way and offered a brief, unreadable smile. Grace returned it, heart hammering. She hadn't even sat down yet. And already Grace could feel the judgment tighten around her like a corset too small to breathe in. The laughter started small, just a ripple, but Grace felt it slice like glass. She sat perfectly still at table 7, her water glass sweating in her hand, while Chloe held the microphone at the head table like it was a crystal scepter. The bride was radiant, of course. Her smile gleamed with the practiced ease of someone who'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in front of a mirror. Her voice was light, cheerful, each word coated in southern charm and sugary condescension. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," Chloe began, her tone syrupy. It means so much to Matthew and me to be surrounded by people who truly support us. Family is everything, right? There was a murmur of agreement, a few claps, someone whistled. And I especially want to shout out to the strong women in the room. Like Grace, she added, eyes gleaming under the chandelier's glow. Raising a child alone? That takes courage. A chuckle ran through the guests. Polite at first, then sharper. Someone at a nearby table whispered something that made the others stifle giggles behind champagne flutes. Grace's spine straightened. Chloe continued undeterred. I mean, you really have to admire someone who keeps going, even when life gives her lemons. Another laugh, bigger this time. Grace looked down at her hands, her knuckles pale. Her side, a soft, forced curve, held in place like cheap veneer. Ethan leaned close, his brows pinched. Mom? She patted his knee beneath the table. And honestly, Chloe added, if more people had Grace's tenacity, we'd all be better off. I mean, she shows up, that's something, right? The laughter broke open now. Too loud, too long. Even Barbara, who had been sipping her champagne silently, leaned over slightly and said, just loud enough for the mic to catch. She's like a discount model with a scratched label. It hit like a slap. The room gasped, briefly, then laughed harder. Not everyone, but enough. Grace heard forks clatter against porcelain, saw a few shoulders shake in amusement, even caught someone mutter, that's harsh, through a grin. Her throat tightened, her ears rang. She reached for her glass of water again, but couldn't lift it without her hand trembling. So she clenched her fingers into fists under the tablecloth, knuckles digging into her palms. Don't cry. She turned to Matthew, hoping, praying he'd intervene, that he'd stand, take the mic, say something, anything. But he sat frozen, eyes locked on his plate, jaw clenched. He didn't look at her. Not once. Ethan was staring now, big brown eyes wide, his little hands wringing a napkin in his lap. Why are they laughing at you? He whispered. Grace opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out, only the ache of 1,000 unsaid apologies. Grace barely noticed when Ethan slid off his chair, until he started walking toward the stage. At first she thought he was just trying to get a better view or going to grab another napkin. It didn't register, not fully, until he passed by the dessert table without stopping, made a sharp left at the floral arch, and continued straight toward the head table. Grace's breath caught. Ethan, she whispered, voice barely more than air. Sweetheart, come back. He didn't. He walked steadily, each step small but certain, the bow tie on his collar slightly askew, one shirt tail poking out from his pants, the kind of detail that would have made her smile on any other day, but not now. A few guests turned in their chairs. A woman at table 4 whispered, Is that her kid? A man angled his phone as if to record, but then lowered it, unsure. Grace stood halfway, torn between stopping him and disappearing altogether. Ethan climbed the 2 small steps to the platform just as the DJ leaned forward to intervene. Hey, little guy, the man said gently. This isn't... But Matthew, still seated beside Chloe, lifted a hand. His voice, though quiet, cut clean through the air. Let him speak. The room stilled. Ethan stepped up to the microphone, both hands wrapping around the silver stem as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He looked so small standing there, surrounded by tall white roses, gold table runners, and guests in tailored suits. But to Grace, he suddenly seemed 10 feet tall. He glanced at her for just a moment, one heartbeat, and in his eyes she saw everything: fear, anger, loyalty, and something deeper, purpose. I know something about the bride, he said. The room inhaled in unison. Chloe shifted in her seat, trying to smile. What are you talking about, sweetheart? Her voice was bright, brittle. Did I leave a hair clip somewhere? Ethan didn't blink. I heard her say something before the wedding. Barbara, midway through a sip of champagne, froze. Grace couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her legs felt like marble, her heart like a glass ready to shatter. Ethan continued. She said she didn't really want to marry Uncle Matthew. Gasps flickered across the room like wind through dry grass. Someone knocked over a fork. A waiter paused mid-step. Chloe sat upright now, color draining from her cheeks. She said, Ethan went on, voice steady, that she needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who'd give her a house and let her go out whenever she wanted. That Uncle Matthew was too nice to ever say no. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Chloe opened her mouth, closed it. Her smile was gone. Grace reached for the edge of the table, her knuckles white. And she said, Ethan continued, now glancing once more at his mother, that once they were married, people like my mom wouldn't be invited anymore. Silence, not stunned, not shocked. Heavy, dead quiet. Even the string quartet stopped mid-note. She said my mom was embarrassing, Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. But she's not. She's kind and brave, and she never says bad things about anyone. His shoulders lifted once, inhale, exhale. Grace's throat burned, her eyes flooded. She didn't try to stop the tears. And just like that, the laughter stopped, but not because anyone told it to. Even Chloe's smile couldn't hide the panic twitching beneath her eyes. She tilted her head, lips pulled into a shaky half-curve, but the corners didn't quite lift. The perfect bride, moments before, now sat exposed beneath the weight of a child's truth. Grace couldn't move. Her hands were locked on the edge of the table. Her heart thudded so hard she felt it echo behind her ears. Around the room, no one spoke. No one clapped. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric. Chloe blinked rapidly, then laughed. It was a brittle, hollow sound. "Oh, honey," she cooed toward Ethan. "I think you misunderstood. Weddings can be stressful. Adults say silly things. Isn't that right?" Matthew turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. Ethan didn't flinch. "I didn't misunderstand. You said it. I heard you." Chloe's smile faltered again. Maybe it was a joke, a private one, between friends. Grace looked at her son, standing there, hands still clutching the microphone, shoulders set. He was 9. And yet he looked steadier than any adult in the room. Barbara broke the silence next, her voice sharp but low. "Chloe, is this true?" Chloe's jaw twitched. "Of course not. I would never—" But her voice cracked on the last word. And for the first time, she looked unsure of what came next. Then from the far side of the room, a chair scraped. A woman in a pale blue dress stood slowly. Her name was Linda. Grace remembered her vaguely from photos of Matthew's college years. A friend from before Chloe, before the family dinners turned stiff. "I heard it too," Linda said. All heads turned. Chloe froze. "I went into the bridal suite to drop off the shoes," Linda continued, her voice calm, hands clenched at her sides. "You didn't see me, but you were talking to one of your bridesmaids. You said exactly what Ethan just said, word for word." Chloe paled. The silence returned deeper now. Matthew stood finally, slowly, like someone steadying himself in water that had grown suddenly dark and deep. "Chloe," he said, "is it true?" She looked up at him, face flushed. "Matt, come on, you're going to believe this? A kid and a girl you haven't talked to in years?" Matthew didn't answer. "You know how girls talk," she pushed on. "We vent, we joke. It was a moment, a stupid private moment. He probably just misheard." "He didn't," Matthew said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "Really? You're going to blow up our wedding because of this? Are you serious right now?" "I asked you before," Matthew said, louder now. "I asked if you were sure, if this was what you wanted. You kept saying yes." "I do want this," Chloe snapped. "Do you?" he asked. "Or do you want the house, the credit cards, the safe bet?" She didn't answer. He took a step back. "You said those things," Matthew said, voice cracking, and then quieter, more broken. "Didn't you?" For the first time that night, Grace didn't feel small, she felt seen. She wasn't sure exactly when the shift happened. Maybe it was the second Linda's voice rang through the ballroom. Maybe it was the way Matthew looked at Chloe, not with anger, but with something deeper. Disbelief, hurt. Or maybe it was the way Ethan stood still, quiet, chest rising and falling, like he had just finished climbing a mountain only he believed he could conquer. Chloe didn't scream, didn't cry. She stood frozen for a moment, then turned sharply, her heels clicking fast across the tile. The door opened, then closed, and she was gone. No one followed. Matthew didn't move for several seconds. When he did, it wasn't with the drama of a man left at the altar, but the slow, quiet heaviness of someone realizing something had ended before it ever really began. Grace remained in her chair, her hands now relaxed in her lap. She wasn't sure what she should do, whether to go to Matthew, to Ethan, or just keep breathing, so she breathed. Ethan stepped down from the stage, still silent, still steady. He walked back toward her, not rushing, not faltering. His little bow tie had come loose, his shoes slightly scuffed from the floor. Grace rose as he reached her. Before she could speak, Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his face in her stomach. She held him tightly, both hands cradling his back, her eyes blinking furiously against the sting. "I didn't want them to laugh at you," he mumbled into her dress. "I know, baby," she whispered. "You were so brave." They stood like that for a moment longer, until another sound broke the stillness. Clapping. Soft at first, then more joined in. It wasn't thunderous, it wasn't wild, but it was real. Grace looked up to see heads nodding, eyes misty, hands meeting in quiet applause. It wasn't for Chloe, or even Matthew. It was for Ethan. He turned his head slightly, brow furrowed. "Why are they clapping?" "Because they saw what I've always known," Grace said, smiling through her tears. "You're one heck of a little man." Matthew approached slowly, hands in his pockets. His eyes were red, his shoulders slumped. Grace straightened as he stopped in front of them. "I should have said something sooner," he said, voice rough. "Back then, tonight, all of it." Grace didn't speak. "I let Mom and Chloe treat you like you didn't matter," he continued. "But I see you now. I really see you." She swallowed hard. "It's not too late." He looked at Ethan and smiled, something genuine breaking through the grief. "He's a good kid." "He's mine," Grace said, pride in every syllable. Matthew opened his arms. She stepped into them without hesitation. The hug was tight, real, pressing years of silence and misunderstanding into one long, honest moment. When they pulled apart, the applause had softened. Some guests had begun to murmur again, drifting toward drinks or stepping outside. But the atmosphere had shifted permanently. Barbara remained at her table, eyes unreadable, lips pressed thin. She didn't approach. She didn't clap. And that was okay, because Grace no longer needed her mother's approval. And just like that, the applause wrapped around Grace. Not like shame, but like shelter. Ethan was half asleep in the back seat, but his words still carried the weight of everything that had changed. The parking lot outside the White Magnolia was almost empty. A few cars remained, scattered like the last guests reluctant to leave a dream they hadn't expected to end. The building glowed behind them, soft golden light spilling from tall windows, flickering gently through trees draped with Spanish moss. Grace sat in the front seat, hands resting on the steering wheel, not yet turning the key. The silence in the car felt sacred. She glanced in the mirror at Ethan, his bow tie now undone, cheeks flushed, curls damp from a long night of emotion. He looked peaceful, and somehow older. "You okay, baby?" she asked softly. He nodded, eyes still closed. "Are you?" The question made her chest tighten. She looked back at the venue, thought about everything that had happened in just a few hours. The words, the silence, the laughter that cut like glass, and the applause that had stitched something inside her back together. "I think I am," she said. "I think I'm really okay." A long pause, then his voice, sleepy but sure. "You're not a scratched label." Grace smiled, tears welling again, but they didn't sting this time. They felt warm, kind, like spring rain after a long, dry season. "You're the best mommy in the world," he added. She reached back, brushing his cheek with the back of her hand. "You're the bravest person I know." He didn't respond, just breathed gently, the rise and fall of his chest matching the quiet rhythm of the night. Grace finally started the car. As she pulled out of the lot, her phone buzzed in her purse. She didn't reach for it, but the screen lit up briefly with a preview. "From Mom, I'm sure you understand. Things got out of hand. Hope you're well." Grace exhaled, then let the screen go dark. She didn't need a response, not anymore. She glanced at Ethan again, her anchor, her reminder, and drove toward home, headlights carving a path through the quiet Georgia roads. The wedding had ended, the applause had faded, but what lingered wasn't bitterness or humiliation. It was clarity. It was love. And it was the quiet pride of knowing that sometimes, when the world tries to shrink you, the people who truly matter will remind you how to stand tall. The drive home was quiet, but something in Grace had shifted forever. There are moments in life when silence says more than speeches, and a child's truth speaks louder than a room full of polished lies. That night, a 9-year-old boy reminded everyone, without anger or theatrics, that kindness and honesty don't come with a price tag or a perfect dress. Because sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding the most courage. Like a lantern quietly left in a window, a single act of light can guide us home through the darkest parts of ourselves. If this story touched something in you, consider sharing its warmth with someone who might need it.